let's do this prayer. If you're willing to say it. You might not be so much after you start reading it. Okay, go to page 102. And we heard this morning in the homily from Father Adam about transformation. Like Jesus was transfigured, but the last line of his homily was, if we take up our cross and follow Jesus, we will be transformed. And so there's our prayer right there that begins at the bottom of 102. So we'll say that together. It ends at the top of 103. Okay. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, here I am. I trust that you have an incredible plan for me. Transform me, transform my life. Everything's on the table. Take what you want to take, and give what you want to give. I make myself 100% available to you today. Transform me into the person you created me to be, so I can live a life you envision for me at any time. I will not come back. I am 100% available. Lead me, challenge me, encourage me, open my eyes to all your possibilities. Show me what it is you want me to do, and I will do it. Amen. The Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. It's a cautionary tale there. Like when we say to our Father and we ask to be forgiven as we forgive others who trespass against us, right? Yeah. As we say those words, we're going. Can be a challenge, right? That's a very challenging prayer to say those words and ask God to change us. Yeah. So anyway, so this the reason the books are free, I just want to give some credit to a couple of guys at St. Thomas Parish who bought 250 books for a buck a piece and said, if you need any of these, just let me know. And I said, great. Give me about 50 of them. So I'm glad I have them for you today. So let's just begin with a little overview of this. If you read a lot of Matthew Kelly, this is a lot of repackaged material, all right? But as I was reading through it, I said, yeah, I've read that before, heard that before. And then it dawned on me, yeah, and you're still in about the same place as you were the last time you read it. Okay? Which is a bit of a bummer. Now, I was still struggling with the same things I struggled with 1 year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago as I read it. And maybe I made some progress, but it kind of was like a spiral where, you know, the spiral keeps passing over those same points as it goes around. But maybe it's a little bit up, but I'm going over the same ground again. And I'm going, I'm still struggling with that same thing right there. And maybe I'm a little bit closer. Maybe the spiral's going up. Maybe it's not going down, but it's not going up maybe as fast as I'd like. So that's kind of my challenge, is to, I hear it, I listen to it, I understand it, I think, pretty well, but do I obey it? You know, when Jesus says those famous words, you know, in so many of the Gospels where he says, you listen, but you do not understand, I'm getting the gist of it, but am I actually willing to let him change me? And that's really the hardest part, I think, for us is as you read that transformation prayer to say, I am willing to be changed, to be transformed by you. And that's a scary moment when we actually are able to say that. I remember when I was getting ordained Deacon and just laying there on the ground, and people always would say, well, what were you thinking about? It must have been very, profound. And I said, the floor was cold. Very profound, yes. But you know that you're walking into that church that day, and you're walking out different. You're a different being, just like if you've been married. The day you walked into that church, you walked in as a single person. The day you walked out a married person. The day that first child was born, you became a mom or a dad. You were never not going to be their mom or dad, right? That doesn't change just because they go to college or something. And so you know that there's this deeper change in being, not just a change in doing, but a real change in being. There's this, what they call an ontological change. There's a change in your very essence, your very substance of who you are. Right? So this whole idea that he's getting at here is, well, what's this biggest lie? What is it? And if you look at the top of the cover, how the modern culture is robbing billions of people of happiness. And his last book was called Perfectly Yourself, which talked more about being rather than doing. The book before that was called Resisting Happiness, which was about why we resist the good that God wants to give us. Why do we resist all these gifts and happiness that God wants us to have. And the first one, of course, was Rediscover Jesus, that he gave back his Best Land Ever. Before that was Rediscover Catholicism and other books. But this is the 4th year of these Best Land Ever books. So, like I said, it's a little bit repackaged, because I didn't sit here and go, oh, I've never seen that before. It's pretty much like, I've seen that somewhere. Which book? Where was it? So it's a lot like that. But like I said, transformation is the key, not just listening and understanding. So if we go to page 3, he gives us the first kind of clue about what this book's going to be about. Oh, I didn't tell you what the biggest lie was, sorry. So the biggest lie, he says, is that holiness is not possible for me. So when we look at someone that we know is holy, just image that person, whoever that is, and think about who you would say, okay, I know that person for me is a holy person. So just let me give me like a couple of those. Who would you think of immediately when you think of a person that's holy?
St. Thomas Aquinas.
Okay, St. Thomas Aquinas, a saint, okay?
Mother Teresa.
Okay, St. Teresa of Calcutta, okay?
Somebody I know, Father Michael.
Father Michael. It could be Father Michael Woods, could it?
Yeah.
Now that's a stretch, but we'll go with it. It's St. Patrick's Day. It's St. Patrick's
Well, there
Day.
is that too.
So we're going to go with it today.
No, because he's a good example of what forgiveness truly is.
He is. He's a great example of a very holy person. And it's on tape, and I said it. He is very holy.
You're going with Father Michael, Father Punch.
Father Ponch?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So those are some examples, right? But what about more examples within your families? Can you think of maybe a parent? Maybe it's your grandmother?
My
maybe
daughter
it's
Kim.
Your daughter, okay. Maybe it's a granddaughter, grandson. Could
My
be
mother.
a sibling,
Yeah.
mother, yeah. So we've been, in a sense, seeing that holiness is possible. But then why is this lie suggested? That we think that somehow holiness is not possible for me. And that's the supposition that many Catholics don't believe. It's other people that are holy, but me, because we know our baggage, right? We know the stuff about ourselves. We know our inner hearts, we know our consciences, we know our inner being and so on. So that's what his supposition is. A lot of people, hopefully it's not all of you, but a lot of people really struggle with this idea that they can be holy. Okay. So if you go down to the bottom of that page, he says that when we do allow ourselves to be transformed, let's go to the top of the page in the bold there. Transforming people one at a time is the heart of God's plan for the world. Haven't heard that in today's time, right? Go down to the next paragraph. Every time you become a better version of yourself, and Matthew Kelly's big tagline is always be the best version of yourself, okay? But every time you just become a better version, just a little bit better, tiny bit better, the consequences of your transformation and echo throughout all your environments, family, friends, and so on. But he makes the point that it is God who does that transforming, but only to the extent we cooperate, because God's grace is constant. So the only variable is me. And am I willing to allow God to change me, or am I not? Because God is in, right? He's all in, so to speak. And the question is, will we be? And so, in the second chapter, he talks about this idea of a happiness project. And he lays out on page 6 that we have a deep yearning in that old section for lasting happiness in a changing world. Now, some people might define this as joy. Okay, so a momentary happiness we might call pleasure. All right? I get my favorite icy from Wagner's, or I get my favorite food, or something, or I get to spend an hour with my favorite friend, or something, right? Those are pleasures, and they're fleeting. I mean, it's there and it's gone. Happiness, he says, is something we sustain for longer. So we can be happy about something, but even that could be taken away, right? I'm so happy I got my new vehicle. Well, that vehicle doesn't stay new, or maybe you total it, or someone totals it for you, and now you're not so happy about that vehicle. It was a momentary kind of thing. It just lasted for so long, and then it's gone. You need another car, another thing, right? So joy is sort of this perpetual happiness, the sustainable happiness. And so he lists some truths on page 7. We'll go through all of them. But he wants to kind of lay out some of his thoughts about what happiness is and what is kind of all about. So we won't go, like I said, into a lot of details about that. But when I added, he asked, do you have any to add to the list? And one thing that I added was that happiness is a choice. Because I know an awful lot of situations where people approach the exact same thing, and one person sees the glass half full, and the other person sees the glass half empty, and it's the same darn thing, you know? You know, how can you be so negative, or how can you be so positive, you know, you're on one side of the fence you're on. And so it really is, I think, with happiness, you know, some people can, in a sense, infuse happiness into a situation or not. And so the question is, you know, is it something that you really choose? He goes down to the next paragraph down there in bottom of 7 where he asks this question. Third line down in that paragraph. Do you believe it is possible to be happier than you have been at any other time in your life? So just think of the happiest moment in your life, whatever that was. I remember I got a hole in one. It was one of them, but that wasn't it. Okay, but think of that happiest time in your life. Maybe, you know, whatever it is for you. Wedding days, babies born, you know, some athletic thing, who knows what it is, okay? But is it possible, do you think, that you could be even happier than that? That's his question. And his suggestion is that yes, that God has a greater plan for you. And that you can have more and more and more and more and more happiness if you allow God to transform you and allow you to share his joy for you. Okay? So then the third chapter goes into the lies of the secular culture. And at the top of page 10, he kind of lays it out in a nice little syllogism there. If you go down about 5 lines on page 10, the meaning of life is to get what you want. And the more you get of what you want, the happier you will be. Now, if you ask a typical person just walking down the street if they would agree with that statement, I think there'd be a fair number of people that would say, that's the way I live. Yeah, I do. I think that's pretty fair. That I live to get what I want, and the more I get of what I want, the happier I'll be. Whatever that thing is for me, right? If I love to play golf, not that that's a good example for the rest of you, but if that's what I love, the more I get to play, the happier I'll be, right? Or if it's some other thing that people love to do, maybe a certain type of food or drink, or it could be gambling, or sex, or pleasure, or vacation spots, or whatever, it's not illogical to think that the more of that stuff that I get, the happier I'll be. And he says that in a sense is the way that's our secular philosophy. And he says, of course, there's 2 little problems with that, and he lists them in the page. One I just kind of mentioned is the first outcome is you get it, and you're happy about it, but your happiness is fleeting. It's not going to last when you get that new car, or that particular toy, or you got that hole in one. Next hole you play, you didn't get a hole in one. You know, whatever that moment is for you, right? And then the second outcome, he says, is at the bottom of page 10, which he says is even worse. It's when we don't get what we want, and now we live what he calls, about 5 lines from the bottom, the rest of our life in a self-imposed victimhood, believing that if we had just gotten that thing, then we would have been happy forever. So for some of us, it might have been Prince Charming. You know, if it would have been that guy, that would have made my life what it was supposed to be. Or that gal I loved in grade school or high school. If I could just marry her, my life would have been great forever. Or if I could have just made the professional golf tour, if I had just been out there with Jack Nicklaus and Arnie Palmer, I'd have been happy forever. Playing in Augusta. Right? I mean, some of us had dreams, it just didn't happen, right? That would have been mine. You know, I would love to do that. But do I live in a self-imposed victimhood, believing that if I had gotten that thing, that I would have been happy forever? And at the bottom he says, the problem is the person who never gets the thing, like the car, never works out that thing, that car, was never going to make him really happy. So he lives perpetually in the false promise. I can't be as happy as I could have been, you know, because I play Willow Creek. Let's face it, it's not Augusta National, you know? See what I mean? So I'm just going to suffer. Life isn't all it could have been, just because I didn't make it down there to Augusta National. Okay? So he goes into some of these kind of things on page 11. If you go down to the 4th paragraph, he says, a couple of simple examples, but the world promises happiness in 1,000 ways. And he lists a few of them in that fourth line. Pleasure, money, possessions, success, power. You know, you can add to the list whatever you want to add. You know, it could be your favorite sports team. You know, you would kind of take them all the way to the Super Bowl or all the way to the Final Four or something, and they lose, and it's all, I was so filled with joy, and they won. But there's always next year if you're a Cubs fan. 107 times they believe once it happened. Okay. So the next page, page 12 is a real important page. He's talking about what God wants for us. And in the top paragraph, he concludes that really God does want us to be happy. God wants us to have the fullness of life and be happy. But he cautions us that even though God wants us to have joy and happiness, it doesn't come without some pain and suffering. So in that second full paragraph that starts off with "don't get me wrong," he states very clearly, I am under no illusion that God wants us to be happy, but it doesn't mean we won't experience disappointment, inconvenience, suffering, and so on. So he says it well, where he says, he wants us to have all this, but yet, at the very end of that paragraph, these things are not incompatible with the inevitable suffering we all experience in life. And I think that's so true, right? When you have your very best things, very best relationships, very best memories, you know, you can always see the perfect thing, but you know that with that person, you might have experienced some pain, right? I mean, you love your children. Was there ever a moment in your life when it was 100% bliss all the time with children? See what I mean? No one raised their hand, did they? Yes, perfect the whole time. Or with your spouse, or with your church, or with your friends, or co-workers, or whatever, right? We know that even when we have great relationships, they come with a fair amount of suffering and pain and sacrifice. So at the bottom of that page, he concludes this in that bottom paragraph. We yearn for long-term happiness, lasting happiness, and when it really comes down to it, that itches your yearning for joy, which transcends simple happiness. So there he kind of gets it out and calls it joy. I think he uses happiness more because it's, people can relate a little quicker to it, but he really is talking in this whole book about everlasting joy. So then he says, a real important sentence at the top of 13. Sooner or later we realize what the world has to offer is simply not enough for us, to satisfy us. So we know that if we get all the things in the world, whatever that carrot was for you and all these carrots, and you got all the things you wanted, would it be enough? And he says, in his mind, the answer would be no. We would know that just the created things aren't enough for us. Augustine said it so beautifully when he said, you made us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you, right? We're made for God. So without God, we're somehow missing. Right? We got something, created things, but we don't have the creator. Okay? So in the next section, he says, it's then when we realize that the world doesn't have everything it can, everything that we need to satisfy us, we have to ask these questions, because we're never going to be satisfied with the worldly thing. Who am I? What am I here for? What matters most and what matters least? And he says these four things provide us clarity of purpose. They tell us those most important things. Our very being, what our mission is, and how to prioritize what matters most versus what matters least. So we live our lives, in a sense, answering these three questions. So if you do one good thing after this, ask yourself, you know, can I just answer these questions? Could I be able to, if you know, I stood in the mirror and looked at myself, would I be able to say, this is who I am? Not what I do, not what I have, not what other people think I am, but who am I deep within? Who am I? And then what am I here for? You know, what's God's big plan for me? What's my plan? What's God's plan? Are they different? Is there a big gap there? Those kind of questions. And what matters most versus least? Where do I spend my time, my talent, my treasure? Those kind of questions are great questions. So in the fourth chapter, he gets into this idea about how we sometimes lie not just outwardly to others, but we lie internally to ourselves. We all know, he uses social media as an example, about people post these things about themselves. They in a sense have an image that they present to the world, who they are on social media. And we do the same thing all the time, whether we admit it or not, just by how we project ourselves, right? And think of how much more honest we are with our family when we decide it's okay to have a temper tantrum, or swear, or get mad, or whatever, but we would never do it around a complete stranger, because we wouldn't want people to think badly of us. But the people that know us, it's okay, because they already know. You know what I mean? We can't fake them out with an image, because they know us. So I can pretend that I'm happy when someone else wins when they play a game against me. I can pretend that. My family knows I'm pissed off. Sorry, camera. All right? But I don't like losing. I don't fail well. All right? So my family knows, no, Dad, this is killing Dad. He just lost. It was close. He hates that. But everybody else is going, oh, he's such a good man. I'm like, so we kind of get it, right? We can kind of pretend our way, in a sense, through life by presenting ourselves a certain way to people we don't know, people we do know, etc. So that's his point there. Is we sort of, you know, pretend more than we actually live. We're putting on these images all the time, these social masks, as we want to call them. So then he gets into chapter 5, where he starts talking about lies about Christianity. I won't go into details of these, but he talks on pages 22 through 26 or so about lies that are about Christianity. And the first one on page 22, Jesus didn't exist. That's a lie. The resurrection is a myth. That's a lie. Number page 24, Christianity preys on the weak and ignorant. Number 4, Christianity is anti-intellectual and anti-scientific. And then at the bottom of 27, Christianity is anti-sex. And then at the bottom of 28, he lists some more things about lies about Christianity and Christians and so on. And he wants us to point, what he's trying to do here is basically say that for people that buy into these lies, it's very sad, because they're not able to experience the joy that they could experience if they believe the truth. And so at the top of 29, he says a couple really beautiful sentences, where he says, some of these lies are aimed at our theology and our beliefs. Others are aimed at the way we live, the Christian way of life. The sad thing about all these lies is they have destroyed real people's chance at joy and happiness. They have done tremendous damage to so many people, and it's important to acknowledge it. These lies have stopped millions, possibly billions, which is the title of the subtitle of the book, of people from discovering the joy and genius of Christianity. So he's saying how sad it is that people are not able to see the truths, and therefore they don't experience the joy that they would otherwise be able to. So this is kind of his premise to start with. We've been told so many lies, and some of us have found truth, and some of us haven't. Some of us are believing these lies. And he says you've been robbed of your joy and happiness in your relationship with God. So in chapter 6, he's going to get to the biggest lie, which I already mentioned, is this idea that holiness is not possible for me. And what's interesting is, on page 32, he puts it down, but he doesn't put the "for me" words on there. Well, I wouldn't have either until I watched his video. And on this particular day of this video, he emphasizes "for me," and he talks all about "for me." And I'm like, why didn't you put it in the book? And the reason was because I think the book was already published. I think he did the videos later, but I think he realized what he was really saying was that last part. So if you want to just jot that in there, that the lie is really that holiness is not possible for me. I can see it in others, he talks about that, but I can't see it necessarily for myself because I know I'm not perfect. At the bottom of 33, he says that. He says, we tend to cast aside the idea because we know we are not perfect. And we equate holiness with perfection. And then he says, if you look at others, we know they're not perfect, yet we know they're holy. You know what I mean? But for me, I'm just not perfect. I'm not, kind of thing. So, chapter 7, he gets into kind of what I say is the meat of the matter. And here he talks about the way we can obtain holiness is to create what he calls holy moments. And so if you don't get this part, the book doesn't make any sense. So we'll spend a little more time right here. But he says at the bottom of 35, when someone says, what is a holy moment? He said, it's a moment when you open yourself up to God. So remember that transformation prayer. You make yourself available to Him. You set aside what you feel like doing. So let's say this morning, maybe one of you felt like sleeping in instead of getting up for 8:15 Mass. Or maybe you felt like not coming here and you said, oh, I just assume go have breakfast. But you set aside your self-interest, okay? And for a moment, you did what you prayerfully believed God was calling you to do. That's a holy moment. So it's when you put God's will before your own. That's a holy moment. He says that's one. Another way he says it, a couple lines down from there, is very good. A holy moment is a moment when you are being the person God created you to be, and you are doing what you believe God is calling you to do in the moment. Again, when you set aside your self-interest, personal desire, and what you'd rather be doing, you feel like doing, but embrace what you believe will bring the most good to the most people in the moment. So I got this morning, I could have said, well, I know I'm assigned at 8:15 math, but Father Adam, he can do math by himself. He doesn't need me. That's true. And if I don't show up at 9:30 for Nicodemus Club, Gene's always got something ready to go in case somebody just doesn't show up. Gene will be fine.
It's Jane.
But it's okay. If I could rationalize, it would be okay. Right? I just don't feel like getting up this morning. I had a tough day yesterday. I had to go to 2 weddings. It was exhausting. I could make excuses, right? I can find a reason. It would make sense to somebody. Maybe not true, but I can sell it, So he says these holy moments then are about this idea of doing and being with God and doing what you think God would be asking you and calling you to do, as opposed to what I might do. So he says, we can look at the saints, we can see them being perfect, and we also can see them being imperfect. If you read the lives of the saints, they weren't perfect. Okay, there were 2 people that didn't sin, Jesus and Mary. Okay, and that's our Catholic teaching, and I think that's pretty accurate. I don't think anybody else can claim that. So he points out some things about holy moments, and one of them I liked is on page 38. It's in the second paragraph. This idea of the holy moment is a thing of beauty. It will last forever. It's a joy forever. Its loveliness increases and will never pass into nothingness. So when we do something good, it changes people's lives when we remember. There's a memory of that. And we say, wow, that was a good thing. That was a holy moment. Somehow cooperating with God created wonderful goodness. Right? So that's an important thing. Then he says another thing about it is that it's replicable. That's in the bottom of page 38, bottom paragraph. The second reason that it is replicable. So once we can do one holy moment, he says, we can do 2. If we can do 2, we can do 4, etc., etc. And so he says, once you start to create holy moments, you can begin to replicate it. Now, he asks a question on page 39 that people ask me all the time in that second paragraph. Some people will ask genuinely, how do I know what God wants me to do? And now, for many of us, that is a real good question, because we're not quite sure exactly. We know that he wants us to do something. We know he has some sort of plan, but I don't know exactly what to do and what the plan is. So he answers it a couple different ways. He says, God wants us to live holy lives, to grow in character and virtue, and become the best version of ourselves. So when we do something that contributes toward that, that's one way. At the bottom of the paragraph, he says, every time you grow in character and become a better version of yourself, you're living a holy moment. So one way I've always kind of thought of it is, if you do a good thing, right, you do a loving thing, how could that be against God's will? Just wouldn't make any sense, would it? So he's talking about that. Every time you do something good, you operate under your good character, your virtue, you become a better version of yourself. You are living a holy moment. So this idea of holy moments is one of compounding, right? We're trying not to just live one a day, like do a good deed a day, but we're trying to say live many, many, many holy moments, because not only will we find joy in it, but we'll make a difference in other people's lives. So that's his big point about how to attain this, is to living these holy moments, and how we then change not just ourselves, but we change the world. So at the top of 42 sort of summarizes it by saying, everyone can understand this uncomplicated approach to transforming simple moments of everyday lives into moments that transform us and other people and bring about a better world. So by us doing these holy moments, change ourselves, change the world, and also follow God's plan for us. So that's his answer to the question. Is holiness possible? Yes, through holy moments. Now, as you go into the next chapter, chapter 8, we're gonna skip over that one, we're gonna go to chapter 9, because there's a lot of good stuff in 9. So let's jump to page 55. And he says, the world needs changing. And I think everybody that watches about 15 minutes on the nightly news would have to say, yes! Doesn't take long. I think if you look at the second paragraph, he says, I don't know anybody who thinks the world is in great shape. This is on chapter 9, page 55. I don't know anyone who thinks our culture is moving in a promising direction. It seems universally understood the world needs changing. But then he says our problem is that as Christians, we struggle with the idea that we can make a difference, that we really can accomplish meaningful change. Even though there's billions of us, we really struggle with the idea that we can really change the world. So his idea here is that not only are we doing an internal change, but we're also meant through these holy moments to change the world. And so his call to us is, in these next pages, is to say, when we make a holy moment, little by little by little by little, we change the world. And so just think back at your life when you lived one of those holy moments and the impact it had on a person. Maybe you brought a person into the church. Maybe you were able to illustrate a particular virtue to someone that needed it to be shown to them. Maybe by forgiving someone. Maybe by just being a good friend to someone. But however you did it, we change each other's lives. And so that's his main point here, is that we have basically set holiness aside, thinking it's for somebody else and not for me. And I don't live out holy moments because I just don't recognize that I'm called to do that, to include God in that, and to live out what God's will through these holy moments would be. So that's kind of what he's getting at there in chapter 9. Chapter 10, he says, is how it's been done before. And so sometimes, and it's really easy to do in this culture today, people can get pretty hopeless, I mean, if you think about it and someone said to you, is the world a better place in 2019 than it was when I was a kid? And I've asked a lot of people this question. Almost everybody says, while they see advancements in a lot of different things, like the medical field, technology, and all that kind of stuff, by and large, they long for the days when they were a kid and families stayed together, ate breakfast and lunch and dinner together, they lived in the same area, they communicated very well with each other, they visited each other, they talked to each other, they knew each other. They long for those days, because today, for many people, they see the world is very scattered, very divided, I mean, you can watch the news and see the division between political parties, you can see, the culture moving in a certain direction. Maybe that bothers you, the way you see things moving, the way the Supreme Court rules things, or the way, whatever that is. But by and large, most people today, when they look back at the glory days, they're not thinking of 2018, they're thinking of 1963, or 1972 or something. They're looking back at some earlier time, And so, his question is, can we come back to a better place and really recapture, in a sense, some of those virtues, those character virtues that, in a sense, our culture's lost. So he talks about the first Christians and how hard it would have been for them. And he asks this basic question is, do you think that they had challenges in the first century? And yeah, sure they did. And do we have challenges today? Yeah, sure we do. So he puts us against each other. 21st century Christian versus first century Christian. And he says in that third paragraph on 65, will it be easier or harder for us to transform the culture and change the world than it was for the first Christians? Now honestly, when I read that, my first thought was, I think it would have been a lot easier in the first century. That would have been my first take, how I kept reading. Because I think it's a little overwhelming for a lot of us. There's billions of people in the world, and there's just little old me in Knoxville, Tennessee. What can I do, kind of thing. But his answer is easier. And he lists 3 reasons. He said, 1, we have legal rights that the first Christians did not. We can openly profess our faith, at least in this country. Back in the day, they couldn't. They would be persecuted and sometimes put to death as martyrs. Number 2, there are more of us. That's true, because there's billions, literally, of Christians. And third, we have the technology that has been used so powerfully against Christianity, but we can harness it now for good and good for God and goodness. And we see a fair amount of that today with just the access we have to resources that we never had before. And for those of you that used to study your faith back in the days before the internet, and we had books. Remember when there were bookstores? Remember that? Library that people would go into and look at books. Remember those days? They're kind of gone in a way. How many bookstores left? Still libraries though. But he's saying now the technology where people find things pretty much is on the computer or on, through an electronic device. But yet we've got so many wonderful things on those devices. We've got all these wonderful DVD series. We have forum.org. We have all sorts of different services. You can be in mass and you can be seeing the readings on your phone. You can get, the daily prayers. Everything's in there, right? So we can use it well. It has been used against us some, but we can also use it well. So he starts talking about what that strategy might be. And as I was reading it, I was just kind of smiling to myself going, how hard it is to not be limiting here, to not limit yourself to say, well, what can I do about this? I'm just one person. But as he'll go on, he'll kind of explain, but if every person does what they can do, it makes a world of difference. Because obviously we've got billions of us. And that's kind of his point, is he's appealing to the masses, saying, we've got to share this with other people. We just can't listen to it and go, hey, this is great. We've got to be out there and take a book and give it to your best friend or your spouse or whomever and say, there's a way that we can live differently. There's a way we can find perpetual joy, not just moments of pleasure. So he says something rather interesting, and at the bottom of 68, it was a line that really struck me. That's why I'm sharing it. It may not strike you the same way, but I thought it was interesting. He says, it's time to wake up. And I was thinking about the apostles today, falling asleep,